Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Evelyn Santiago, the Executive Director of ARNEC, and I am pleased to welcome you once again to ARNEC's webinar series on young children amidst COVID-19. Thank you all for joining. Please indicate your name, organization, and country where you come from in our chat box so we get to know who are with us today. This webinar series, which aims to facilitate learning in the ECD community, is one of ARNEC's response strategies to the pandemic in the region. We bring this webinar series to you with the support of one of our partners, Generali, the Human Safety Net. Through these webinars, we aim to mobilize and connect the ECD community with partners in the region who are implementing practical strategies and innovations for young children and their families in this difficult time. We have already completed 5 webinars in this series, focusing on topics related to the impact of COVID-19 on the most vulnerable young children and their families, including children with special needs. We also looked at the importance of caring for parents and caregivers, as well as understanding how young children cope with anxiety, fear, and stress. We also had a webinar on distance learning approaches for young children. And just last week, we covered the different protection risks and threats experienced by young children and their families during this pandemic. We've been receiving good responses for these webinars, with participants ranging from 200 to 400 plus for each session. Thank you all for participating. Majority of our attendees come from Southeast and South Asia, but we also have good following from the rest of the world. Today's webinar, entitled Exploring the Power of Play in Building the Resilience of Young Children and Their Families, is also aligned with our regional advocacy for playful parenting. More specifically, ARNEC serves as a regional platform for a playful parenting project, which Save the Children in Bhutan is implementing with support from the LEGO Foundation. Today's webinar will be moderated by Ms. Meenakshi Dogra. Meenakshi is an early childhood education professional and international consultant for ECE. She is also one of ARNEC's national representatives for India. Thank you, Meenakshi, for agreeing to moderate this webinar, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for providing the overview of the ARNEC webinars. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants for joining us from different parts of the world. We welcome you all. Before we begin, I would like to share a few gentle reminders for the webinar and for your participation in the webinar. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and the resources shared will be made available on the ARNEC website afterwards. For asking the questions, I encourage you to please use the question and answer feature located in your Zoom meeting control. You can also upvote a question by clicking the thumbs up sign. To be informed of the next webinar, please join us as ARNEC member. The website detail is provided in the screen. Also, please like and follow us on Facebook to get regular updates. After the webinar, you will receive an online evaluation form to assess your experience in participating in the ARNEC webinar. I request you to kindly fill that. I would also like to inform everyone that online poll to understand what is happening in different countries is currently live. I would request all of you to please take a minute. Now let me share about what we expect from this webinar. This webinar focuses on the power of play in building the resilience of young children and their families at home during COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the key questions which we are going to answer through these webinar are related to the role of play in early learning and holistic development of young children. How can families optimize play-based interactions at home? It also focuses on transforming play into an engaging and purposeful interaction between young children and their families and caregivers. It also focuses on how can parents and caregivers build on play to help building the resilience of young children and their families. Lastly, how do play-based interventions from different countries can help in ensuring the continuous learning and meaningful engagement of young children and promote good hygiene practices for children and families. Next, please. Now I would like to introduce our panelists. We have 5 speakers today who will be sharing their valuable experiences with us. Our first presenter today is Zil Pop. Zil is a senior researcher at the LEGO Foundation, focusing on building evidence on learning through play, whole child development and lifelong learning. She is going to talk about the importance of play for young children and their families and caregivers during COVID-19 pandemic. Next, please. Our next speaker today is Caroline. Caroline is a social entrepreneur, CEO of Create Creative Arts Therapy and Training. She will talk about the key role of developmental play in ECD for social, emotional, and physiological well-being. Welcome, Caroline. Our next speaker is Samyukta Subramanian. She is a program head at Pratham Education Foundation, and she will be focusing on the role of play in engaging with young children and their families during COVID-19. Welcome, Samyukta. Our next speaker is Marlene Floresca. She is an education program specialist for Child Fund Philippines. And today she will talk to us about fostering parent-child engagement through play-based family routines during home quarantine. Welcome, Marlene. Last, we have Phong Thi Mai Nguyen, and Phong is an education technical advisor in Save the Children Vietnam, and she will be focusing on increasing bonds between children and caregivers through play-based activities. I would like to invite Jill to start her presentation.
Great. Hi, everyone. I think they're going to get the slides going. So thank you very much to ARNEC for putting together a whole webinar on learning through play. It is a dream come true for us at the foundation to be able to talk about this with everyone this morning. Next slide. So I'll be covering today in my talk just an overview for everyone before we hear from the rich speakers that we have lined up about the importance of learning through play, the relationship between learning through play and children's development, and then I'll touch a little bit on the role of play in terms of children's coping with chronic and everyday stress. Next slide. I'm sure everyone can relate to this, that the world of today and tomorrow is increasingly interconnected and dynamic. And because of this, children really require new skills as they grow and face continuous need for lifelong learning. Learning through play promotes the personal characteristics necessary to successfully navigate this new world for young children. Our goal at the foundation and with everyone that we work with is to really encourage the development of creative, engaged, lifelong learners to help them navigate and thrive in this new reality. We know that play begins and is so important very early on in development. And as children develop and transition into formal education, play also has an important role in that arena as well. And then throughout children's life, we believe that learning through play really helps with lifelong learning. Next slide. So play engages many aspects of children's development. So as children venture outside of their comfort zones, they're building confidence in themselves as they face new challenges. You can see here from the slide is children can pretend play to own an ice cream shop, and with their money, which could be sticks or anything that's around, their maths and language skills are also being strengthened. And as children look for new ways to build up their pretend reality, they are exercising creativity. And you can even think as you are in your neighborhoods or in your communities about how much joy play, when you see and hear children playing, that brings to you as well. Next slide. Children are really motivated to play throughout their early and middle childhood, which makes it a fertile ground for learning and developing new skills. Children possess an amazing potential to learn. They have imagination and inventiveness to create new ideas and opportunities, and they have a strong motivation to connect with others. Next slide. So as you can imagine, we get asked all the time, what is play? How do you define it? And if you read any article or any book about play, you'll see that there are a lot of different definitions. On our website, you can learn about how we define play through characteristics that lead to deeper learning, but I'd really like to highlight the importance of child agency. For me, this is really what transcends all of the definitions of play. At one end of the spectrum, children are given the freedom to direct their own activities. At the other end, play can be guided by adults. And it's not that we need to have children have all of the freedom over their play, but to some degree, agency is required for children to engage and have effective learning. It's so important that they are active participants and their learning is not passive. The greatest opportunity that they have to flex their thinking muscles is when children are allowed to create and develop independent of instruction. Next slide. People also ask us, what does play do for children? What skills does it support? How does it foster their development? And play likely serves multiple interrelating adaptive functions for children, not only in terms of their social or cognitive skills, but also it helps them to regulate their emotions and behavior, as well as fostering flexibility and problem solving. So just as children's skills are interrelated, play also impacts children's development in that way. Next slide. I'll just take you through a couple of examples of how play impacts children's development and then use the different types of play to illustrate that. So physical play, we all know what this is, I hope, involves climbing, dancing, playing ball, rough and tumble play. And while this might be difficult now with a pandemic, there are certainly opportunities for indoor physical play. And what we see is that play really helps children in terms of their overall well-being. It has many health benefits. It's linked with academic progress, self-regulation, and children feeling confident socially. Next slide. Young children play with many objects. In fact, they probably play with more everyday objects in the home environment than actual toys. And so play with objects begins very early, from mouthing and biting to rotating an object and looking at it, banging things and dropping them and picking them up and dropping them again. Children progress playing with objects from very early on to about 4 years of age. And this is so important in terms of children's development of representational abilities. So pretending that a banana becomes a telephone. They learn how things work, different ideas about reasoning, language development, and also problem solving. Next slide. I think pretend play is one of the most researched types of play out there. And pretend play, such as the classic games of make-believe, really lead to children's strong development of their language skills, narrative skills, storytelling, and emotion regulation. Sometimes when children are reading a story and are allowed to be very dramatic and act it out, that also leads to their strong language skills. And so pretend play is also very important as children develop in terms of their language and social emotional skills. Next slide. So just a few key points about learning through play. It certainly supports children's overall healthy development in terms of pre-literacy and numeracy, learning to learn skills or holistic skills. The benefits and role of learning through play really differs across contexts and cultures. I think one important thing for caregivers is that it doesn't require a lot of time and toys. And so usually families have what they need at home to have a rich play experience. And it's really about quality over quantity. So play moments can occur during everyday routines as well, such as cooking, feeding, bath time, and bedtime. Making them playful can really be meaningful for young children. Also important to remember are the caregivers, and play provides opportunities for caregivers to form sensitive and positive relationships. It really provides the context for those rich interactions. And parents and caregivers also report that play is fundamental to their own happiness and makes them feel relaxed, energized, and more creative. And I think now more than ever, that's really important. Also, adults really set the stage for play, but children are the real play experts. Let them lead. Next slide. I think during the time of this pandemic, it's really important to recognize the importance of play in helping children and adults cope with stressful situations. Play allows children to have this safe space to try out different things, to explore their feelings in a very safe way. This leads to positive affect while also helping to reduce their anxiety. Such a practice might also help children create patterns of coping, which will be important because we know throughout their life that they'll be faced with different stressful situations. One thing that caregivers might notice is a difference in play themes during this time. So some studies show that during stressful situations, children might have more aggressive themes, or you might notice more repetition in children's play, or that the play is linked with the source of stress. And this is very common and normal as children sort of work through their feelings about what's going on. Also important is that children recognize themselves that play is an approach that they like to use in order to help them relax and reduce their anxiety. Next slide. Finally, play provides a supportive context to help children cope with everyday stress and severe or prolonged adversity. It's a powerful experience for developing self-regulation, so children's abilities to control their emotions, to express their emotions, and it also helps them cope with stress. When combined with adult guidance, the benefits of play are particularly effective in supporting children experiencing adversity. And professionals in a variety of settings can employ play to support families experiencing stress. We see in a lot of interventions that play is a component where it's modeled, where parents learn the importance of play and how it helps them and their children in coping with stress. And so that should perhaps be highlighted a little more during the pandemic as we help families. I think we'll hear from some other panelists who are going to talk more about how they've incorporated play into such interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill, for providing this insightful presentation and focusing on the key role of play in preparing children for challenges and for making children, for supporting children during this difficult. Now, we would like to move on to our next speaker. Caroline, please share your presentation with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe you have my presentation. If you could be kindly put it up. Thank you, Joel. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why play matters from a social, emotional, and physiological well-being stance, very much tying in with Jill and what she's just spoken about. My background is that I come from an arts and play a background as an occupational therapist and as a creative arts and play therapist. And during this COVID pandemic, I've been working with children over Zoom, zooming into their homes, working with individual children and working with small groups of children on the autistic spectrum. And what I thought it would be nice to do, Joel, if we could have the next slide, please, is to start with a little bit of a story, to put it in the context of the children that we're working with, the language of the child. So this is the little story of Lin Lin's lockdown. Lin Lin is a 4-year-old girl on lockdown. She doesn't really know why, but she and her family have had to stay at home for weeks now. She hears her parents talking about illness and talking a lot about grandma and grandpa. Daddy shouts more and mummy sometimes cries, and they always seem worried. Something bad is out there. Maybe it's a bad monster trying to get them. Lin Lin isn't sure. She doesn't really understand what germs are. She's never seen one. So Lin Lin is confused. The world has become a scarier place than usual, smaller, confined, and uncertain. She likes being home with mummy and daddy more as she gets lots of their attention, but fundamentally, she doesn't feel safe. She has no friends to play with, and she cannot run outside and play in the playground. Her days have taken on a new form in their small city flat, less social, less physical, and strangely unsettling. Food becomes central. Sometimes she likes to play with it and make a mess, which irritates mummy. Occasionally, she has online lessons with her classmates, but she quickly loses interest if they're not interactive. Talking heads on screen are not very engaging, and she would prefer a video game with music and clear visuals that she can control. Her sanctuary is her bedroom, her doll's house and her teddies. She constantly rearranges her toys, ordering and sequencing them, and rescuing her teddies from disasters. She builds dens of pillows and her duvet, which she and her teddies hide in. And sometimes she has tantrums when her mother tries to clear them up before she's finished. Her mother worries that Lin Lin is anxious and tries to reassure her that COVID does not really make children ill. But Lin Lin knows it scares her parents, so it must be something to worry about. She uses play not just to express her anxiety, but also to process it and make sense of the world around her. Playing with her food makes her feel free. Lining up her teddies gives her a sense of control. Reorganizing her doll's house helps her feel she can influence something. And building safe spaces helps her build resilience. Lin Lin uses play to make sense of her world in the language that works for her. Thank you. Next slide, please, Joel. So child's play, I believe, is imperative for children's social emotional well-being. It is their main medium for understanding and expressing the world around them. And when we look, particularly in the ECD field, we see that children play beyond and below language. Their play is what we call pre-verbal, a lot of it, particularly if you're working with children under 5, and it's embodied. It's felt in their body. We feel anxiety in our bodies, and this is how children will naturally express things out. So what I feel we really need to do and promote is to harness the power, and I see this as a clinician all the time when children come to me for play therapy, that they harness play, they don't speak about their issues, they play it out and they process their experience. It is also a medium for learning, as Jill spoke about, and I think it's really important for supporting transitions when we go back into schools, helping children ritualize moving from one space to another. Thank you, Joel. Next slide, please. I think we've talked about, we're all very familiar with the losses of this pandemic. It is a time of grief for many children. I just want to focus on a few of these losses. One of the key things I want to look at as an occupational therapist is the loss of movement and time outdoors, and the loss of diversity of sensory input, because children really need to move to work with that embodiment. They need to move, they need to play in playgrounds, they need to run with the wind on their face. They also, as Jill mentioned, need to feel that sense of control, that sense of agency. And a lot of them have lost this in the same way that we as adults have. We're all familiar that there's also been that loss of quality education. As now a Zoom educator, I'm aware I'm giving them something, but it's not the same as when we work face to face. And again, I'm going to tie that in with a couple of frameworks in a minute that look at how we engage all the senses for learning. And this is where play is so important. I also just wanted to mention a little bit about Zoom fatigue, how children who are in front of screens all the time, there's some interesting research coming out about how that's changing some of the neurotransmitters in the frontal lobe. If you're on Zoom all day, like I am most of the time, you're exhausted by the end of the day. Think what that's doing to a younger brain that's just forming. And this is something I hope we will see more research coming out of. We also know that when there's anxiety, we're looking at neurobiological changes in the brain, rises in cortisone and dropping in serotonin. And this will change the wiring of young children's brains with potential implications for pre-morbidity for anxiety in later life. And again, as a therapist, this is something that is imperative that we look at supporting and changing. We touched last week on there being more children at home. Sometimes that's a great thing, as we saw in Linlin's story, but also sometimes that's leading to more violence and abuse. And that's another topic in itself. Next slide, please, Joel. So 2 things I wanted to look at. All this loss, all this change has neurological and physiological impacts on the developing child. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of the triune brain, but I mentioned how when cortisone levels go up, the part of our brain that is activated is the reptilian brain. This is our hind brain. It's our primitive brain that we share with the reptiles. It deals with fight, flight, and freeze. Now, if you're trying to rationalize with a young child through language in moments of anxiety, because it's the reptilian part of their brain that is being stimulated, they are not able to rationalize, hear and respond to language in the way that we as adults are. When adults have anxiety, they have the same neurobiological response. So we need to embody it. We need to help them build activities that tap into the limbic system and begin to bring their thoughts up into the language center. Now, the limbic system is our social and emotional brain, and it's the brain that responds to interacting with objects, tying back into Jill talking about play with objects and its importance earlier. There's a whole lecture on neurobiology here, but I just wanted to touch on that. Language doesn't work in early childhood. We need to embody it. We need to make it physical. We need to play with objects. Similarly, when we're looking at playing on Zoom, we're looking at the environments that children are in. Zoom environments very much stimulate the visual system as you're looking at people and the auditory system. But as an occupational therapist, we look at how the brain learns through 8 different senses, and most of these are not being stimulated. Children aren't moving enough, which increases anxiety. They're not using some of their other senses. Taste and smell doesn't really interact on Zoom. They're not learning how their body works, and this has huge implications for social learning and emotional well-being moving forward. Thank you, Joel. Next slide, please. I believe, though, that this isn't a story of despair and despondency, because I believe children are natural meaning makers. The brain is remarkably plastic. If we give them the right opportunities, they will be able to reverse some of what's happening now. My profession as a therapist is that this is what I do. I help children reverse the wrong pathways and rewire the right pathways. And with that in mind, next slide, please, Joel. I developed a framework. Some of you in Asia will be very familiar with this because we had a conference about this framework in the Philippines last year, called the developmental play approach. And I just wanted to highlight very briefly the bottom of this pyramid. Most of our play work, when we're dealing with the impacts of this pandemic and the trauma that children are experiencing, is to go back to the bottom pit of the pyramid. We need to do lots of body work, lots of sensory work. We need to help children play out the experiences of this pandemic. And we need to build positive relationships, that attachment and safety play. After that, from that foundation, children will go up and explore. They'll make mess like Lin with her food. They'll move, they'll engage, then they'll sequence, stack, organize, and be able to process at the higher level. We've developed a whole load of resources, next slide please Joel, that I'd just like to share with you based on this model. It's the model that informs all my clinical work, and back in March my colleagues and I developed this stay-at-home resource. I've put the links at the end of this talk, and you can access them for free. They're now in 7 languages. We've got a Facebook page as well. They are 30 fun activities based on the developmental needs of the child. They tell you what you need, how to do it, and top tips for doing it. And these can be used by therapists, clinicians, parents, anyone doing teletherapy, any of you who are tuning in today. Next slide, please. I'm just going to share one of my favorites of the 30, which is about creating that safe space, building a den, and how children need to create and have their own agency, their own inner locus of control for developing their own safety. This will have incredible impact on their emotional well-being. Okay, and then just very quickly to sum up, as Manishki has appeared, that means I need to stop talking. Final slide, and then the other 2 are resources slides you could look at, is just a few top tips that have come out from my work and my experience of having to rapidly take everything online, but also some offline top tips. If you're online, use strong visuals. We're looking at the limbic system here, props, puppets, use seeing language. Let children know that you see them, name them, mirror the children. We're trying to build brains through that mirroring. Lots of hands-on activity. Parents, really key, and this ties in with the playful parenting program ARNEC is promoting. And again, the offline tips tie in with what Jill said. Let the child lead, safe spaces, don't direct. My bugbear is multisensory, and work with the developmental needs of the child. Most of all, there's no rights and wrongs in play. It's great for us as adults, and I believe very strongly it will transform the children we are working with. Thank you. If you just want to put the last slide on to end, Joel, I'm now going to be quiet, but these are all the resources, and you can find them afterwards, including the 30 free stay-at-home, play-at-home resources.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for such an interesting presentation. That was really, really helpful. So we have got a few more minutes for the questions. Yeah, so my first question is to Jill. Jill, could you please elaborate on the adult role in play, especially at this time when there may be stressed parents and teachers who do not fully understand and find it hard to support children in play at this time? So could you please elaborate on this? Yeah.
Sure. I think that's a great question, first of all. And it can be really hard for parents and caregivers to feel like engaging in a playful experience with their child if they themselves are experiencing stress. And so I think it's really important that the adult takes care of themselves as much as they can, but also to recognize that perhaps playing with your child is one way to help you in terms of managing the anxiety or stress that you're feeling. And so often parents report that, once they are able to get into that moment of play with their child, that they really feel connected. They feel like it helps them bond with their child and helps them, feel happy and reduces their own anxiety. And so sometimes it's maybe just, engaging in that play and realizing, oh, this maybe really is helping to reduce my levels of anxiety. But first and foremost, I think that caregivers and adults need to, take care of themselves with their own coping strategies, and it's okay to take that time out to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. My next question is to Carolyn. Carolyn, participants want to know what should be the guidelines? What are the things which they keep in mind for children with special needs? So for their play, what are the things they can keep in mind? So if you can, throw some light on that topic, that would be really helpful. Yeah.
I think the key thing is to understand developmentally where the children are.
Yeah.
I always talk about stages, not ages. Often we think, oh, they're 5, they must be doing this, or they must think like this. The whole developmental play pyramid that I designed looks at how we develop in utero and in the early years. It ties in a lot with the WHO nurturing care framework as well. Those first 1,000 days that as adults we don't remember. A lot of play development is pre-verbal. And this is why I talk about embodied play. It's about understanding your physical body. A lot of children I work with who have learning challenges of one sort or another have issues in what we call sensory processing. And that's why sensory body play is bottom of the pyramid. And the more we can understand the behaviors and the stage the children are at, the better we're going to be able to design play. All the stay-at-home, play-at-home resources that you can download are designed developmentally. So if you've got a child who's not got language, who's not able to sit still, we've put, they're color coded. You go to the ones that are sensory body play coded so that you build that skill. So it's really about learning to read children's play. Even children with the most profound learning challenges are able to play. We just have to work out how and give them the right opportunities. It's a big question. I hope that answered it a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was really helpful. I have one more question to Jill. So the participants, they have asked that how they can, kind of impress parents or convince parents, those, especially those who are not very well educated, about, play is significant in early years. So what are the things, what are the strategies they can use for convincing parents?
Well, I think that, certainly different messages related to the importance of play and children's development, that oftentimes parents worry that if their child is playing that they're not learning, or that they're not learning things for academics. But really play, for me, what's most powerful is that play really supports the skills that help children in terms of their academics. So we know that children that are playing with objects and developing their visual spatial skills, that's so critical for learning math later on. And so all of the early learning is that play supports is important for later academic success. So, what they're doing with their child right now is absolutely helping them in terms of their later achievements and lifelong learning.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Yeah. Okay, Carolyn, I have one more question for you also. So, so there's question on, there is how can we compensate outdoor play with playing at home? Because during this time, children are not allowed to go out and socialize with their peers. So so during this time, how does one compensate for this?
I mean, again, on the resources, I've put a lovely little video about how you can do sensory physical play that develops all the systems in a small room. And you'll see some of them in the play games as well. Children are natural movers. They'll throw themselves on the floor given an opportunity. Don't stop them. Allow them to roll. You can get them lifting up their duvets, blanket play. Less sitting, more moving, even in tiny rooms. But do have a little look at my YouTube channel and you'll see there's a lovely little movie about how you can do movement in a tiny flat. Can I just also add to Jill's thing? I co-designed with the Lego Foundation a lovely poster about why play matters. We designed it for parents and teachers, and it can be found on the Lego Foundation Play Futures website. And I think I share it whenever I'm training in Asia, but it's a free downloadable poster that any of you can take and put up in your centers with a little brochure that says how you use it. To promote play. I'm a very visual person, and I've had lots of feedback saying, oh, this is great, can we put it in our school, put it in our clinic? It's a free resource that Jill's team and my company co-designed, and it's available for anyone here in Asia to, anyone across the world. I know you've come from all over the place, to print out, to share. I believe we also, Jill, have permission for it to go into translation, and you just need to write to the Lego Foundation to get the original format if you're able to put it into your language.
Great. Thank you for mentioning that, Carolyn.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you, both of you. Now I would like to hand over to Samyukta. Welcome, Samyukta.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Pratham, which is a not-for-profit that works in the space of education in India. We work on building the foundational skills of children across the country in the 3 to 14-year age segment. And for my presentation today, I'll be focusing on the early years, where we work with governments largely, as well as with communities. And in the early years in India, we have schools and we have preschool centers. The preschool centers are supported by the government, but there are two types of preschool centers. Government-supported centers called Anganwadis, as well as preschools within schools, which are increasing in number today. And then, of course, there are Pratham-supported preschool centers. So we work with all of these across different parts of India and with multiple languages. So when the pandemic hit us in India, pre-COVID, what we were doing in the earlier space was actually supporting teachers and volunteers in improving the quality of transaction of content within the classrooms. We were also supporting mothers, creating mothers groups in the community where we could work with them to support the learning of their children, and also supporting transition into school. So getting children ready for entering grade 1 into school through school readiness fairs, where mummies and children would come to these little booths where we would find out if they have the skill set ready to enter school, and if not, get them ready. So as you can see, this was all a face-to-face interaction. And when the pandemic came and the lockdown hit us, we had to move very quickly, pivot around, moving from face-to-face to what we can do now. So we were caught between what we were already doing and what we wanted to do now, which is stay connected with everyone. And so it was the motivation of the entire Pratham team to stay connected that I think sort of pushed us to what we needed to do next. And so now we are trying to connect with people. We are very far away from them, but closely connected with them through different platforms and lots of phone calls. We're trying to make sure that mothers and children play together and learn together, even though there's so much else changing around them. And we're also trying to focus on building awareness around hygiene and sanitation practices, partly through translating videos, but also recognizing that our communities, there's a lot of misinformation which we want to correct. And we also need to recognize that the context is important. So for instance, many of our communities may not have running tap water, but how do you keep the hygiene levels going? How do you keep the hand washing happening? Even in places like these. These were the videos that we created and shared with our people. So our strategy was largely built around who we wanted to reach out to, which were parents, volunteers, children in the communities, how we wanted to communicate with them, what we wanted to send out to them through all our different platforms, and how to partner with different not-for-profits as well as governments so that we could reach the last child. So I'm going to try and open out some of this in my next few slides, starting with how we decided to communicate. So remember, we were doing face-to-face and we needed to move to a mode where we still wanted to be closely connected. And so we built a strategy where we decided that we would send out messages, activities, and many things that parents and children can do together. We created the content, we translated it into different languages, and we had a Pratham person who would make the calls to make sure that the parents and the volunteers received the messages, understood them, and in return, we would get lots of messages as feedback from the children in different communities. So to share more with you around the content and the communities and the sort of response we got, I just want to play a short video here for you. Hope all of you could see the video. If not, it was basically about a video that went out from us, and then millions of responses that came back in terms of photos and videos. I'm sharing another slide here where we can see pictures. We've sent out something about a mother explaining how plants grow, and then we've got lots of siblings and parents and everyone talking about plants on that particular day. And so while we had messages going out over the WhatsApp platform, as a friend of mine put it, we were looking at modern technology, but we were also looking at outdated technology, because very quickly we realized that in our communities, there are about 30% people who are receiving the WhatsApp because they have smartphones, but there were many, many more who did not have smartphones. And so we went back in time to this technology that is outdated in many parts of the world today, called the SMS, or the short messaging service. We would send out an activity which would be written. And remember, the SMS on a small phone has no audiovisual aid. There's a limitation on character, but we wanted to make sure that there's content going out every day on this. And to our surprise, when we sent this out, people got back to us saying, this is, they wrote back to us, they created audio files, and to our surprise, they even sent us photos and videos. And when we tried to find out why, how did videos come around to us, it was because parents and children were having so much fun. They were so proud of what they were doing and what they were learning together that they would borrow their neighbor's phone or a relative's phone so that they could send us, the Pratham team, the photographs of what they and their kids could actually do. In the SMS, if parents cannot read, we often call them and ask them if they've understood the message, or if they could not understand what materials could be used. We talk to them about that as well. So glimpses of different things. It's very hot in India, so trying to make little fans, separating out potatoes from the onions, everything that's available at home. Girls making little expressions, watching themselves in the mirror, and many more things that we were able to do in the last more than a month. So I've talked about content, community, and how we were communicating. And now I'm going to go quickly into collaboration, where we've collaborated with different governments so that we can reach the last child. Here, we've experimented with channels on TV. There are states that are experimenting with radio, which is in fact very popular in another state called Maharashtra today. There's the IVRS, or the interactive voice response system with the Delhi government, where if you call a number, they call you back, and it's a missed call. You call them back, you click the grade you're in, and they tell you what kind of activity you can do at home. And so learning from all of this, I think there are many things that we've learned, but the crucial thing I think here is that the content that went out was that which was easy to do, not like a burden on the parents, with materials that were really close to them. It built a routine, so every day there were thousands of people who would wait for this one activity to come, where everyone would come together to do it. And because it was so much fun, I think, lower anxiety, higher resilience, and a lot of excitement because of the content. The communities, there were moms, but then there were fathers, there were siblings, there were grandmas and grandpas, everyone waiting to get into these activities. And I think this is going to be very important when we move forward. In the communication piece, I think what was crucial was that we had the digital infrastructure, we worked around it, we leveraged pre-existing social infrastructure. But the most important part, I think, was the human connection. The technology was just a medium, but following up, talking to people, checking in, how are you, what's happening, how did it go? I think that was the most exciting part of, keeping us close together, even though we were physically distant. Moving forward, I think we have reflections internally as an organization about how we want to learn online, how will we shift our trainings online. But we know that we want to do a big celebration when this ends through a campaign, but also to celebrate the resilience that all of us have shown in this entire period that was unanticipated. But I think for our organization and for all the organizations in the world today, this is something, we need to be mindful of, that, there are things that would have happened in the communities before we go in there, and to be mindful that we may have an idea, but to look for what are the needs of the community when we first enter is something I think we all need to be mindful of. And last but not the least, a big shout out to everyone, just to say that, we know that mothers and children are the ones who suffer the most in any pandemic. And so while we cannot enter, how do we strengthen the hands of community members so that they can support each other and come out of this very, very resilient, is something that I think all of us across the world need to think about in our own context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samyukta, for sharing those fantastic ideas with us and the work which Pratham is doing, especially during this COVID-19 times. So now I would like to call upon Marlene. Yeah.
Hi.
Marlene, so could you please share your presentation with us?
Yeah, good day to everyone. First, on behalf of Child Fund Philippines, I would like to thank ARNEC for giving us this opportunity to share the work that we do with our partner communities during this pandemic. I will be sharing with you all about our home-based family activity kits in this presentation. Next slide, please. So this presentation will walk us through a brief background of who we are as Child Fund here in the Philippines, and what is the current COVID-19 scenario in the country. And finally, I'll be sharing the details of our home-based family activity kits and how it promotes play to strengthen the bond between the caregivers and their children, and at the same time encourage early stimulation among young children. Next slide, please. So Child Fund Philippines is a country program of Child Fund International, and we have been here in the country for over 48 years now, working with government agencies, local government units, and civil society organizations, and promoting the rights of every Filipino child. At present, we are working with 12 partner organizations in 20 of the 81 provinces of the country. We support the development and protection of every child through understanding their experiences of deprivation, exclusion, and vulnerability, most especially those who are experiencing marginalization because of their ethnocultural affiliation, their disability, their vulnerability to natural disasters and armed conflicts, and their exposure to hazardous labor. Next, please. So this is just an overview of where the Philippines is currently in its battle against COVID-19. So in the first weeks of March, the national government declared COVID-19 as a public health emergency, a national public health emergency. And the week that followed, enhanced community quarantine was enforced in the entire Luzon Island. Luzon is the majorly red part in the upper portion of the Philippine map that you are seeing right now. And upon the activation of the National Public Health Emergency, this paved the way for the local government units to access their emergency funds and to be able to respond to the COVID-19 situation. And also this propelled the other local government units to impose their local community quarantine protocols. So currently, we are over 2 months into the community quarantine, and the Philippines has now eased on the quarantine protocols, allowing essential industries to operate. However, as of May 25, we still have an average of 200 new confirmed cases daily, a majority of which are in the National Capital Region, where Metro Manila is located. Next slide, please. So the key issues that we are currently facing right now is that this pandemic has further exacerbated the conditions of majority of the Filipinos, most especially those who are living below the poverty threshold, which is about 17% of the total population of the country as of last 2018. So the community quarantine has greatly affected those who are living on daily wages. Most of them are into the informal workforce sector. This community quarantine has threatened their means of livelihood and their capacities to provide for the basic needs of their families. Although the government has provided financial support and periodic relief distribution, but this could only last for some time. In terms of other issues that we've been experiencing pre-COVID, there have been increased reports on domestic violence, and also it's noteworthy that in the first 3 months of the year, reports of online child sexual exploitation in the Philippines has tripled. This is corresponding with the global lockdown. I'm sharing this big picture of what's happening here in the Philippines because we all know that these environmental factors are having implications in the overall development of every child, most particularly those who are very young. And so, like, for example, the loss of jobs would mean that there will not be enough food on the table, and the emotional and psychosocial disturbance has an impact on the caregiving capacities of the parents and other adults in the household. In terms of education, the schools and ECD centers have suddenly closed as the quarantine was imposed. And so parents and caregivers are struggling to play both the roles for caregiving and for providing learning opportunities for their young children. And we are expecting this kind of scenario probably until at least the end of this year. Next slide, please. So I will be sharing now with you Child Fund Philippines home-based family activity kits and how did we came up with this response intervention during this pandemic. So at the onset of the community quarantine, Child Fund Philippines has started to rethink the direction of our programming in the coming months, with the presumption that our existing programs would not be feasible anymore with the limitations in mobility, like mass gatherings are prohibited and physical distancing is strictly implemented almost everywhere. And so activities like our usual activities like parenting sessions and even the young children's participation in early childhood development centers are now quite impossible. Next slide, please. So, our home-based family activity kits are simple and easy to follow instructions for play. And the community quarantine really has disrupted the flow of the daily activities of most, if not everyone. So it has brought a lot of uncertainties about what's going to happen in the following days, which most likely caused unnecessary confusion, anxiety, and stress to the parents and to the caregivers and the other adults within the households who the young children are usually having interactions with, especially during these times. And so establishing routines is one of the recommendations of the World Health Organization for the individuals and families to be able to cope with the potential negative effects of prolonged home quarantine, particularly on the well-being. In these family routines, we integrated family activities that can be done with all the members of the family. The play-based activities are jump starters to teaching social-emotional learning, some literacy and numeracy activities for young children and for the other members of the families. So we've arranged the activities in a weekly team and organized these activities according to the context of our partner communities. Next slide, please. So these are some of the pictures that we've gathered, some of the families sent to us. By the way, we are on our 4th week of implementation of this home-based family activities. And so we emphasized during the first week about the establishing of routines according to what's most feasible in every family, like what's the normal thing that they usually do pre-COVID, and so they could integrate it into that family ECQ or Enhanced Community Quarantine Routine Chart. We developed the activity guides based on weekly themes. The first week was concentrated on establishing routines that's most feasible for their own family. The themes also include about facts on COVID-19. And when the global lockdown happened, a lot of open source materials were shared by organizations. And so we've organized this activity guides according to the context of our partner communities. Next slide, please.
Marlene, you have 1 minute left. Yeah.
Yes, this is second to the last slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've recognized that most of our partner communities are in far-flung areas with limitations to connectivity, and so we partnered with telecommunications company in order to disseminate the instructions through SMS blasting. So we did a mapping prior to the implementation of the home-based family activity kits. And so that we could know who among the partner families and communities will be able to reach by this intervention. And then the last slide, please. So moving forward, so integrating and redirecting our program strategies to make our interventions still responsive to the needs of the families in the communities where we work with. As we adjust in the coming days, we are exploring other platforms on how we can deliver this home-based family activities. So currently, we've just forged a partnership with Facebook, and these materials are being translated into materials that can be uploaded through Facebook. And so we are also gathering feedbacks from our partner families to allow us to know how else can we improve on the intervention of this home-based family activity kits. So I'll be willing to answer questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marilyn, for sharing those wonderful ideas about how parents can play together with their children during this time. So now I would like to call our next and last speaker, Fong, for sharing her presentation with us.
Good day, everyone. And thank you very much, ARNEC, for giving me an opportunity to share some of the activity that Save the Children in Vietnam has been doing during the COVID time. So in this presentation, I would like to introduce you an activity to increase the bonds between children and caregiver through play-based activities. In this slide, I would like to give you an overall picture about the situation in Vietnam. So all schools were closed from the end of January through April, and about 24 million students are out of school, of which approximately 15 million are ECCD and primary school students who are our target population. And this global pandemic threatened children and their rights in countries around the world, including Vietnam, and expose them to potentially massive disruption to their healthcare, education, access to basic needs and services like food, protection, and social interaction with family members, teachers, peers, and communities. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as in the recovery phase, Save the Children in Vietnam has been among the first responders and a reliable partner to the government, to children, and communities. Save the Children have been quite flexible in rapidly changing situation, adapting our program and supporting our partner, children, and community to engage remotely. We have developed many innovations to respond to the newly emerging needs, and I want to share with you one of those. This is the activity that we have been working with the parents in Lào Cai, in which we send the message to the parents in Lào Cai. So Lào Cai is a mountainous border province and is a resident for 25 ethnic groups, and among which ethnic minority groups account for 64% of the population. Children in this province, especially the ethnic minority groups, are still deprived of quality health, nutrition, education, and protection services. And Save the Children International have been implementing a child-centered community development program in Lào Cai since 2013. And the program's goal is to ensure that disadvantaged children are able to develop their full potential by providing quality and sustainable services on care and education for children, families, and communities. The program consists of 4 components, and early child care and development is one of them. And in this activity, around 500 parents have received the message from the teachers in Lào Cai. And as you see in the slide, we have the parents come from the different ethnic minority, including the Kinh, Thầy, Giao, the Nung, the Mông, and Zai, and other ethnic minorities. This picture shows you the teacher who are sending the message to the parents in Lào Cai. Some of them can stay in the school, but some of the teacher may need to move around in order to get a better access to the internet. So teacher have sent the message to parent daily in a month, except Saturday and Sunday. Then they are sending 2 messages for the parents. And the messages are sent in the form of text. And as you may notice from the previous slide, that we also have the parent who speak another ethnic minority language. And that's why those messages are also translated into the 5 popular ethnic minority language in Lào Cai and sent to the parent. In this one, in message 1, we send them every day, and the purpose of the message is to provide a quite practical guidance on how to support caregiver of young children remotely during the large-scale response and the recover phase of COVID-19 pandemic. The messages are shared daily to ensure the regular contact with and between the participation. This message align with Save the Children tips for parents and caregiver, supporting children well-being and learning during COVID-19. And this message aim to help the caregivers understand how their own stress is transferred to young children and noticeable in their children's behavior. For example, more crying or acting out, and how toxic stress affect young children brain architecture. The first message also provide caregiver with a supportive and protective community and encourage them to care for themselves and process the stress. Message 1 also have caregiver respond appropriately to children's behavior and needs, reduce the stress experienced by children by providing them with a safe, predictable, playful, and loving home. There are 4 main themes in message 1, including keep calm and manage stress, helping children manage stress, applying positive parenting, and reflection, relaxation, and gratitude. One example of the message is, young children loves routine. When a day flow in a similar sequence day after day, knowing what comes next makes them feel safe, confident, and help them build a strong brain. And when they know what comes next, they better behave. In message 2, we divided it into 2 parts. In the first part, we share with them an activity for the children. And the activity covers Save the Children Early Literacy and Math, and Social and Emotional Learning Foundation activity for the age group, as well as the activity for motor and executive function development, positive parenting, and caregiver stress reduction, such as building the resilience skill. These activities are guidance aligned with the WHO healthy parenting tips. The main themes of the first part of this message are motor and executive function, the language and literacy, the cognitive and math, the social emotional, and the positive parenting. And one example of this message, of the first part of this message is, we send them an activity and ask the parent to play a game with the children. And in this game, the parents will express an emotion and the children will guess how they are feeling. So the question is, what does it look like when we are happy? Or what does it look like when we are angry? Or what does it look like when we surprised? And then the parents gonna act out an emotion and the children can guess what emotion that is. And then they will take turn in order to act out the emotion. And on the second part of the message, we will send them a message to remind the parents so that they remind the children to wash their hand. And on Friday, we will send them a message to instruct the parent to read a book with their children following the interactive reading skill. And this is how a message gonna look like when the parent receive them. As you can see here, it has 2 parts. The first one is the text of the message, and this one is the audio record in 5 different languages that the parents speak in Lào Cai, so that they can practice the activity with their children, even they cannot read the King language. And after the first week of sending out on of those messages, we send the parent a very short survey asking about how helpful was the activity suggested to the parent this week. And we have 52% of the parents saying that the activities are really helpful with them. And 43% of them also found the activity are really helpful. And we also asked them, how often did you use the suggested activity this week? And it is really positive that the parents start practice and play with the children more than what they said in the baseline. So we even have like 27% of the parents practice with their children up to 5 times a day. And we have like around 40% of the parents practice with their children from 3 to 4 times a week. And we also have a small number of the parents who practice even more than 5 times a week with their children. And we also have parents who share some of the activity that they are doing with their children at home, from the even from the ingredient that they are using for cooking. So with this activity, they teach the children the number and counting. So now in Vietnam, the school has been closed, and we all know that the school may be closed in many other countries, but we do believe that many learning opportunities are still open for children, and Save the Children have been working to contribute to this opportunity for the children. So I will stop my presentation here for the Q&A section. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phong, for sharing the strategies to develop the bonds between parents and children. Now I would request all the presenters to switch on their videos. So as we have got a few more minutes for the question and answers, so I would like to ask few questions. My first question is for Samyukta. Samyukta, could you please elaborate on how to reach out to the parents who don't have access to internet or any other media resources? So could you please share your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So this is a challenge, and over time what we found is that the internet connectivity or availability of the kind of phones that people have is a problem. And so for us, we tried to get numbers of people who we could call, but also to find out who's in the neighboring household through whom we can reach these people. So a lot of the communities, once they got to know that there are these activities coming in, there was this curiosity which sort of drove the connections between them, which we did not anticipate. But so we were able to reach out to them because they would make other numbers available to us. So that was something that we learned. The other thing is that governments are very aware of what the challenges are. And so states like Maharashtra and now Uttar Pradesh in India, they're starting radio programs because they know that connectivity is an issue. So the radio, while one can access it through apps today, they also have, for instance, in Maharashtra, loudspeakers in big public places where they broadcast what are those things that you can do together, and there's some interaction over radio where you can also hear what can be done. There's also the missed call facility that some people are using, but again, that needs a phone. And then there are TV channels that we're coming back to. Can there be channels which can demonstrate what needs to be done and how, and then people watch that and try to do it at home? So these are some of the ways, in which we're trying to reach out to the last child. But it is a challenge. I understand that. But across India, I think we are experimenting with all these new ways of doing this.
Thank you, Samyukta, for sharing your insights with us. My next question is for Phong. Phong, due to the pressure of work from home, parents are unable to provide stimulation to their children. So could you please share some tips that how they can ensure, how they can provide stimulation to their children and give time to their children?
So as I share in the presentation that the message has been sent for the parent daily, and the teachers of the class is the one who gonna send the message to all of the parents. So teachers are really familiar with the parents within that class. Normally they're gonna encourage the parent to practice with their children, and then they also encourage the parent to share the photo or the video that they practice with their children. So as I show in the slide, we have the parent who share the activity that they practice with their children at home. So by that way, the teacher always encourage parents to set aside time during the day to play with their children.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Fong. My next question is to Marlene. Marlene, how to help or facilitate children with, screen time, as they are currently on, on the laptops, tabs for their school activities. So, what are the things which we can, the parents can keep in mind or to minimize their screen time? Could you please share
So,
some ideas?
yeah.
Yeah.
Based on our experience in implementing the home-based family activity kits, so we encourage the play activities that we encourage in the kits are mostly involving storytelling time and a lot of movement activities. And we also would like to note that the communities that we work in are in the very far-flung areas, and most of them do not actually have access to this gadgets. And so it's actually the lack of their exposure to these gadgets. And so we'd like to maximize the opportunity that they could play freely. In terms of maximizing, or balancing the time between the screen time and the physical activities and other activities, that's where the establishing of routine I would suggest is most applicable. So when the parents recognize that it's important to have a routine, like the most workable for their family, like 30 minutes the child can play with his tablet, or the child could watch YouTube, educational videos in YouTube. Integrating this in the routines are very important, so that there will be balance in with the other activities that the child can do.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Now I have last question for Carolyn. Carolyn, if you can answer that question. How can teachers integrate play into online lesson? And also when the schools are reopening, how to effectively integrate play, keeping in mind the measures of, social distancing and all?
Okay, so two questions. First online and then reintegration. I think online, I've done a blog on this, you can find on my website. They need to be playful. Children will not engage if you sit as a talking head. You've got to play. So I think the key thing is to get teachers to believe in the power of play and be playful and realize they've got to move, engage. I'm very lucky here. I'm sitting in the room where I do my online pay classes, and I have lots of props. So you've got to be playful. You've got to model it, because otherwise it's not going to work. So I think get teachers playing, thinking in a playful mindset, moving, and using objects as much as possible. Moving back into when we're moving into schools, I think I just answered somebody online about this. If you think about the bottom of the pyramid, we need play to be sensory first and foremost, and about movement. But how do we keep social distance? We also need play to be safe. Now, circles, a lot of circle play. There's a lot of circle dances where you don't need to touch, but you get a sense of intimacy as you're dancing. A lot of traditional dances, those of you who are working in more rural areas, it's what children instinctively do. We see this up in Cox's Bazaar. The way that children deal with trauma is through music and rhythm and dancing. So I think circle work, where they don't have to touch, but they can move together, so they're sensing a social togetherness in distance. Lots of sensory work. Also, lots of object work. I think making art, and I've got a lot of these ideas in the stay-at-home, play-at-home activities, where you build new worlds. We talk about we're going into the new normal. Children have no idea what it looks like. We've talked about control. Help children build, and it can be out of recycled rubbish, it can be out of twigs and leaves, the new worlds they're going to move into, so that you're using that object playfulness to encourage a sense of hope. The other idea I had in one of my webinars recently was to help them plant little seeds. They get home, they plant a seed and they watch it grow, and they learn about patience and they learn about nurture. It's what they need to do to themselves, and there's lots of science learning in that. And They get to play with lots of sensory things, but they can do it at a distance. So those are just a few ideas for play activities when you move back into schools.
Those are really helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolyn. I have one last question for Jill. Jill, could you please share some suggestions for creating policies to make play as a mandatory for children?
Yes, that's a tough question to answer in like 1 minute, but I think we have some great resources on our website. I think, the more that we understand the power of play and the importance of play, hopefully we can encourage, governments and ministries to, change their policies related to play. I mean, that is really what can make a difference in terms of more play within education systems.
Great. Thanks, Jill. Yeah. Now, I would like to thank you, all of you, for sharing your valuable experiences with us. Thank you, Jill, for highlighting the significance of play in helping children how they can regulate their behavior and emotions, and also emphasizing on how learning through play can support the overall development of children, and how the play movements can happen during the daily routines of their children, and how parents can ensure that, and also for highlighting the role of play in providing the supportive context which can help children to cope with the stress. So thank you, Jill, for highlighting those key points. I would like to thank Carolyn also for highlighting the need to harness the power of play for ensuring the smooth transition, especially after once the school reopen, and also highlighting the impact of play on the physiology and the brain development of children. I would also like to thank you for sharing the developmental play pyramid. That was really interesting and helpful. Thank you, Samyukta, for highlighting some of the key strategies and the practical strategies to reach out to the parents, and also for ensuring that how parents can play with their children. So thank you for sharing those ideas with us. I would like to thank Marilyn also for highlighting the key issues which are impacting children during this situation, and also for talking about the home-based family activity kits for mitigating stress due to this COVID situation, and also how parents can ensure and play together with their children. So thank you, Marilyn. Lastly, I would like to thank Fong for focusing on the key themes which we can keep in mind while talking to parents, while reaching out to the parents, in terms of strengthening the bond of parents with their children. So thank you, Fong. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your valuable experiences with us. Now I would like to hand over to Evelyn for the next step.
Thanks, Meenakshi, for moderating so well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our presenters. They're really wonderful, presentations and resources. Thank you to Meenakshi for moderating this session very well. And also, of course, to all our participants for their engagement, for their questions. This has been a very interesting, and informative session. I see a lot, I receive a lot of comments, positive comments and feedback from our participants, which only goes to show how important, this session is. So congratulations, everyone. Before we finally close this webinar, just a couple of reminders from our end. Please respond to the webinar evaluation form, which we will be sharing with you in a while. And please visit and share our COVID-19 and ECD resources. They are posted in our ARNEC website and also in our Facebook page. So please like the ARNEC Facebook page so you get regular updates. You can also download webinar presentations and also the recording of these webinars in our website. We do send FB alerts, so please, again, follow us on Facebook. The next webinar in our series will cover issues affecting the ECD workforce. This will be done jointly with UNESCO Bangkok. UNESCO will be sharing the results of the regional survey on the impact of COVID-19 on the ECD workforce. So we will be sending out details about this webinar very soon. Again, thank you for participating in today's webinar. Stay safe and keep well, everyone. Thank you and hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you so much.